Vera had not planned on becoming the most stared-at woman in the Five Realms. But here she was, standing in the middle of the great hall of Solvaire, with every noble, every guard, and every perfumed dignitary gaping at her, like she had just sprouted a second head. In her hands, still warm, still pulsing with a faint golden light, sat a dragon scale the size of her palm. Not just any scale, the one the poets wrote about. The one wars had been waged over, the heart scale of the Dragon King himself, pulled from the center of his chest and placed into her trembling fingers, like she was somehow worthy of holding it. She was not worthy. She was nobody. She was a healer from the Ashenmere wolf pack, with dirt under her nails and herb stains on her sleeves, and a heart that had been publicly shattered approximately 9 minutes ago, and the most powerful creature in the known world had just handed her the anchor of his power in front of 300 witnesses. The Dragon King stood before her, taller than any man she had ever seen, his dark gold eyes unreadable, his expression carved from granite. He said nothing. He simply watched her hold the thing that could kill him if it were ever destroyed, and waited, as though her reaction was the only thing in the room that mattered. Vera's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her brain, usually so dependable in a crisis, had completely vacated the premises. She wanted to say something intelligent, something gracious, something befitting the magnitude of this moment. What came out instead was a very small, very strangled sound that was not technically a word in any known language. Behind her, someone dropped a goblet. The clang echoed through the silence like a bell. 9 minutes earlier, Vera had been hiding behind a pillar in the west corridor, trying not to cry. She had come to the summit of Solvaire as part of the Ashenmere delegation, one of dozens of wolf packs gathered to reaffirm their treaties with the Dragon Throne. It was supposed to be the proudest moment of her life. She was the youngest healer ever sent to represent Ashenmere, and she had spent 3 weeks preparing remedies and tinctures for the journey. She had been so proud, so stupidly, painfully proud. Then she had walked past the alcove near the east stairwell and heard Fenric's voice. Fenric. Her alpha. The man she had loved since she was 16 years old. The man who had held her face in his hands last autumn and told her she was his future. His voice had been low, conspiratorial, the way it got when he thought he was being charming, and the words had hit her like a physical blow. Delara is the strategic match, Fenric had said to someone she could not see. She has the bloodline, the connections, the breeding. The council will accept her without question. As for Vera, she was a pleasant distraction, but I cannot bind myself to a woman with no lineage. The pack would never respect it. A pleasant distraction. 3 years of devotion, of healing his injuries after border skirmishes, of sitting beside him through pack councils, of believing every promise he had whispered in the dark. A pleasant distraction. Vera had pressed her fist against her mouth and willed herself not to make a sound. She had backed away from the alcove on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else and found the nearest pillar to collapse behind. That was where she had been, silent tears tracking down her face, when the horns sounded and the great hall doors opened and the Dragon King entered. Solvaire for the first time in living memory. She had wiped her face, smoothed her dress, and slipped into the hall with the rest of the Ashenmere delegation. Because duty did not care that her heart was in pieces. The ceremony had been brief. The Dragon King had walked the length of the hall, flanked by his steward, a sharp-eyed man named Osric, whose gaze seemed to catalogue every person in the room. The king had acknowledged each pack delegation with a nod. He had paused at Ashenmere, and Vera had felt his gaze land on her for exactly 1 heartbeat longer than it should have. She had looked away, convinced she had imagined it. Then the hall had gone quiet in a way that was not ceremonial. It was the kind of quiet that preceded something no one expected. Vera had looked up and found the Dragon King walking directly toward her. Not toward Fenric, not toward the Ashenmere Alpha, not toward anyone important. Toward her. The crowd had parted like water around a stone, and the silence had thickened into something suffocating. And then the Dragon King had stopped in front of her and done something that had not been done in over 600 years. He had pressed his hand flat against his own chest, closed his eyes, and when his fingers pulled away, A single scale came with them. It was gold at the edges and deep amber at the center, warm to the touch, and it glowed with a light that seemed to breathe. He held it out to her, no explanation, no ceremony, no words at all, just the scale, offered on an open palm, and those dark gold eyes watching her with an intensity that made her forget how to stand. And now here she was, holding it. While the entire hall stared and her former alpha's face drained of every drop of color. She cannot accept that. Fenric sputtered from somewhere behind her. His voice cracked the silence like a stone through glass. She is Aishenmere. She is my... He trailed off, apparently realizing mid-sentence that claiming ownership of the woman he had just discarded might not play well in front of 300 witnesses and a dragon who could incinerate him with a thought. The Dragon King did not look at Fenric. He did not acknowledge the interruption at all. His gaze remained fixed on Vera, and something in his expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. As though he had found something he had been searching for, and was quietly, privately relieved. Osric stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs with practiced calm. The heart scale has been offered and received. By the ancient covenant, the bearer is now under the protection of the Dragon Throne. Vera blinked at him. Protection of the Dragon Throne. Her. The herb-stained healer with the broken heart and the runny nose from crying behind a pillar. What? She whispered. But Osric had already turned to address the hall, and the Dragon King had already stepped back. And the scale in her hands pulsed once with golden light like a second heartbeat settling against her palms. And somewhere behind her, Fenric made a sound like a man watching his entire world rearrange itself without his permission. Vera did not sleep that night. She sat on the narrow bed in the guest quarters assigned to the Aishenmere delegation, and stared at the scale on the table beside her. It glowed faintly in the dark, a soft amber pulse that matched the rhythm of her own breathing. Every time she moved away from it, the glow dimmed. Every time she moved closer, it brightened. She tried not to think about what that meant. By morning, the entire summit was whispering about her. The stares followed her as she walked toward the healer's station, and the murmurs cut off too quickly when she passed. The Aishenmere delegation avoided her entirely, and Delara had given her a look that could have curdled milk across a crowded room. Vera buried herself in work. She was still a healer, whatever else had happened, and the summit had no shortage of injuries. Blistered feet from the mountain crossing, a dislocated shoulder from a sparring demonstration gone wrong. A young wolf with a rash that turned out to be an allergic reaction to dragon incense. She was grinding willowbark paste when Osric appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, watching her work, his expression unreadable. Vera's hand stilled. "The king requests your presence," Osric said. Vera's dropped. "Why?" Osric did not answer. He simply waited with the patience of a man who had delivered this kind of summons before, and knew that questions only delayed the inevitable. The walk to the king's study took them through corridors Vera had never seen. The upper levels of Solvaire were older, the stone darker, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and something metallic she could not name. Dragon scent, she realized. It was everywhere here. Osric stopped at a door reinforced with iron and pushed it open. "Bring the scale," he said, as though she might have left it behind. She had not left it behind. She could not bring herself to let it out of her sight, which was a problem she was not ready to examine. The study was dim, lit by a single fire that burned without wood in a stone basin at the room's center. Maps covered every surface. And behind a desk stacked with correspondence sat the Dragon King, his gaze fixed on a document, his jaw set, his posture rigid in a way that suggested he had been sitting there for a very long time without moving. He did not look up when she entered. "Sit," Osric murmured, gesturing to a chair against the wall. Vera sat, clutching the scale in her lap like a talisman. Minutes passed. The Dragon King read his reports. Osric leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. Nobody spoke. Vera counted the cracks in the ceiling and tried to slow her breathing. She had no idea why she was here. She had no idea what was expected of her. She had no idea why the king had given her his heart scale, or what it meant that the thing pulsed in time with her heartbeat, or why sitting in the Same room as him made the ache in her chest from Fenric's betrayal feel oddly, impossibly distant. 10 minutes passed. 15. The Dragon King's pen slowed. He blinked, frowned slightly, shook his head as if to clear it, his hand pressed flat against the desk. Vera watched with growing unease. Something was wrong. His eyes lost focus, his breathing changed, deepened, and the tension in his shoulders began to release in a way that looked involuntary. His head dipped forward. Is he? Vera started to rise from her chair. Osric's hand shot up, palm out, the gesture sharp and unmistakable, do not move. The Dragon King's eyes closed, his head came to rest on his folded arms, and within seconds his breathing had leveled into something deep and slow and steady. He was asleep. Vera stared. The most feared ruler in the 5 realms had just passed out at his desk while she sat 5 feet away. Osric moved silently to the desk and studied the king's face with an expression Vera could not read. Then he looked at her, looked at the scale glowing in her lap, and something clicked behind his eyes. "How long were you in the hall last night?" Osric asked quietly. "When the heart scale was offered. From the moment you received it to the moment you left the room." Vera blinked. "I am not sure. Perhaps 20 minutes. The king retired to his chambers directly after and slept for 3 hours. The longest unbroken rest he has had in 8 months. Osric's voice was measured, clinical, but his eyes were sharp. "And now you've been in this room for 15 minutes and he is unconscious." Vera's pulse quickened. "You think the scale is doing this?" "I think you are doing this," Osric replied. "The scale is merely the conduit." The weight of his words settled over her slowly. She looked at the sleeping king, at the shadows carved deep beneath his eyes, at the gauntness in his face that she had not noticed from a distance. "He doesn't sleep," she whispered. It was not a question. "No," Osric confirmed, "he does not. The Dragon King slept for 2 hours." Vera sat frozen in her chair the entire time, barely breathing, the heart scale warm and pulsing in her hands. When Osric finally escorted her out, her legs ached and her back was stiff and her mind was reeling. In the corridor, Osric turned to her. "The king woke 90 seconds after you left the room," he said. "Just like last night." Vera stared at him, words failing her entirely. "I have questions," she managed. "I'm sure you do," Osric replied. "The king will see you again this evening, his private chambers. Sunset." He was gone before she could object. Vera stood in the Dragon King's chambers that evening and tried very hard not to stare at the bed. It was enormous, it was covered in dark furs, and it dominated the room in a way that made her pulse do something extremely unhelpful. "This is a practical arrangement," the king said from somewhere behind her, his voice low and clipped. Those were the first words he had spoken directly to her since the hall. His voice was deeper than she had expected, rougher, with a graveled quality that vibrated in her chest. Vera turned around and immediately wished she hadn't. He was standing by the window, arms crossed, the firelight catching the angles of his face in a way that was deeply, profoundly unfair. His amber gaze watched her with an expression she could not decipher. "An arrangement," Vera repeated carefully. "Osric has explained the situation to you. He told me you don't sleep. He told me I apparently fixed that. He did not explain why." She paused. "Or why you gave me the heart scale in front of 300 people, instead of, I don't know, sending a note." A crack appeared in the Dragon King's composure. "It was not planned," he said after a beat. Vera blinked. "I'm sorry. You accidentally pulled your heart scale out of your chest?" "The scale chose you," he said stiffly. "I felt it respond the moment you entered the hall. It has never done that before." Vera looked down at the scale in her hands, still glowing that soft, steady amber. "Respond how?" "It burned here." He pressed his palm flat against the center of his chest, and something vulnerable crossed his face before he could mask it. "As though it recognized you." "I could not have stopped myself from offering it if I had tried." Vera absorbed this slowly. A magical artifact embedded in the Dragon King's body had apparently decided, of its own volition, that she was important, and had compelled the most powerful man alive to hand over the anchor of his power to a heartbroken wolf healer he had never met. "That is a lot to process," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal. "I imagine so." A beat of silence. Then Vera glanced at the bed again and felt heat flood her entire face. I should clarify, she said quickly. I am not going to. I mean, I understand this is about sleeping, actual sleeping. Just to be clear, that is all I am willing to do in that bed, sleep. The Dragon King stared at her. What else would we do? Vera opened her mouth, closed it, considered the various ways this moment could get worse, and decided every single one of them began with her continuing to speak. Nothing, she said firmly. Sleep. That is what I said. That is what I meant. Good, the king replied, though his ears had gone faintly red in a way that suggested he had belatedly caught up to the implication and was choosing to power through it with royal dignity. He gestured toward the far side of the room. A narrow cot had been set up near the wall, dressed with a single blanket and a pillow that looked like it had been borrowed from someone who did not particularly like the person borrowing it. Oh, Vera said, looking at the cot, then at the massive fur-covered bed, then back at the cot. Of course. She moved to the cot and sat down, placing the heart scale carefully on the small table beside it. The scale's glow brightened slightly, as if pleased to be set down in this room, in this proximity. Do you have a preferred sleeping time, Your Grace? She asked, smoothing the thin blanket with brisk efficiency. When my body forces the matter, he replied. Conversation, a pause, unnecessary. Wonderful, Vera said with entirely false cheer. Then I will just sit here in the dark in silence in a strange man's bedroom and try to will myself to sleep. This is fine. Everything about this is completely fine. The corner of the Dragon King's mouth moved. It was so subtle she almost missed it. The barest twitch of muscle gone before it fully formed. But it had been there, the ghost of amusement quickly buried. He crossed to the bed, still fully dressed, still wearing his boots, and lay back against the furs with the posture of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to relax. You are not going to remove your boots? Vera asked before she could stop herself. His gaze cut to her, sharp and unreadable. Right, she said quickly. Your bed, your boots, your rules. Something flickered across his face again, that same suppressed almost smile. And Vera felt an absurd spike of triumph at having nearly cracked the Dragon King's composure twice in one evening. She extinguished the candles one by one, the room dimming to nothing but the amber glow of the heart scale and the low light from the fire basin. She lay down on the cot and stared at the ceiling. The cot was not comfortable. The pillow was a crime against pillows everywhere. But the room smelled like smoke and cedar, and something warm beneath it all, something that was distinctly him, and against every rational instinct, the scent made her feel safe. Silence settled, thick and heavy and charged. She could hear him breathing, controlled, deliberate breaths, the kind a person took when they were trying to force their body into submission. There was something painful about the effort in it, the way each inhale carried the weight of a man fighting his own body for rest that would not come. Vera closed her eyes and began to count the seconds. She got to 412 before his breathing changed. The deliberate rhythm loosened, deepened, and the tension drained from the room like water through cracks. He was asleep. Vera turned her head and looked toward the bed. In the dim amber glow, the hard lines of his face had softened. He looked younger. He looked exhausted in a way that sleep was only beginning to address. The shadows beneath his eyes were deep enough to hold secrets, and his cheekbones stood sharper than they should have on a man of his build. And the heart scale on her bedside table pulsed in time with both their hearts, steady and warm and synchronized, like it had been waiting for exactly this. Vera lay awake for a long time, listening to the Dragon King breathe, and wondered what on earth she had gotten herself into. Then, somewhere in the deep hours of the night, his breathing fractured. A low sound tore from his throat and the fire basin flared violently, throwing wild shadows across the walls. His hands clenched into fists against the furs, his whole body locked with agony. The heart scale blazed white-hot on the table, and beneath the light, just for a moment, Vera smelled ash, not wood ash, the ash of something that had once been alive. Then the light faded and the room was quiet again. Vera stared at the Dragon King in the dark, her heart hammering, and knew with absolute certainty that whatever was wrong with him went far deeper than sleeplessness. She did not mention the nightmare. In the morning, when pale light crept through the heavy curtains and the Dragon King stood by, The window, already dressed and armored in composure, Vera sat up on her cot and searched his face for any trace of what she had witnessed. There was nothing. His expression was stone. His gaze settled on her for a moment, then slid away. "The arrangement will continue," he said. "Osric will manage the details." "Your Grace," Vera started carefully. "Last night, something happened while you were sleeping." His expression hardened. Nothing happened. The fire basin flared on its own. The heart scale turned white. I could smell. Nothing happened. He repeated, and the words came out hard enough to end the conversation entirely. Vera pressed her lips together and swallowed the rest. Fine. He did not want to talk about it. She could respect that. She had plenty of experience loving men who refused to acknowledge the things that were destroying them. That evening, she returned to his chambers with a knot of anxiety sitting low in her stomach. The king was at his desk when she entered, reading by the amber light of the fire basin. He did not look up. She settled onto her cot, arranged her heart on the bedside table, and waited. He fell asleep within 30 minutes, and for 2 hours, nothing happened. The room was warm, his breathing was steady. Vera began to relax. Then the heart scale flared. The light hit her like a wall of heat, searing through her closed eyelids, and the scale in her hands burned so intensely she gasped and nearly dropped it. But instead of letting go, her fingers closed tighter on instinct, and the room vanished. She was somewhere else. The sky was the color of a wound, deep orange and bruised red, choked with smoke that rolled in slow, heavy waves across a landscape that had been scoured down to bone. The ground beneath her bare feet was black and cracked, radiating heat that rose in visible waves. Ahead of her, stretching to the horizon in every direction, were the remains of a city, not ruins. Ruins implied age, decay, the gentle reclamation of stone by time. This was fresher. This was a place that had been alive very recently, and was now emphatically, violently not. Walls still stood in places, scorched black, their edges glowing faintly with embers that refused to die. The air smelled of char and copper and grief, and the silence was worse than any scream, because silence in a place this size meant there was no one left to make a sound. Vera's breath came in shallow, panicked bursts. "Where am I?" Movement caught her eye. Thalric stood at the edge of what might have been a market square, his back to her, perfectly still. But he was not the Thalric she knew. Here, in this burning place, his skin flickered with light, as though flames moved just beneath the surface. His hands hung at his sides, and from his fingertips, slow rivulets of fire dripped onto the scorched ground like molten gold. "Your Grace," Vera called out. But her voice was swallowed by the dead air. She ran toward him, or tried to. The ground shifted beneath her, soft and treacherous, and the heat intensified with every step. When she finally reached him, she grabbed his arm without thinking. His skin was burning. She cried out but did not let go. She could feel the fire beneath his skin, not attacking her exactly, but pressing against her touch like something testing the boundaries of a cage. Through the heart scale, which still blazed in her other hand, she felt the full force of what lived inside him, not just fire, rage, guilt, devastation so total it had its own gravity, and beneath it all, a voice that was his but not his, murmuring the same words over and over in a language she did not speak but somehow understood. "This is what I am. This is what I do. Everything I touch, I burn." "Your Grace," Vera said again, gripping his arm tighter. "This is not real. We need to leave." He did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the ruined city, watching it burn and never stop burning. Vera pulled. The heart scale pulsed violently in her hand, and the world cracked open like glass. She woke on the cot, gasping, drenched in sweat. The heart scale clutched against her chest. Across the room, the Dragon King lay still and peaceful in his bed, his breathing deep, his face soft with sleep, as though nothing had happened, as though she had not just stood in the wreckage of a city he carried inside himself every single night. Vera stared at the ceiling and tried to stop shaking. Her palm was red where the scale had burned her, a faint imprint of its shape pressed into her skin. Whatever was wrong with the Dragon King, it was not just sleeplessness. It was not just nightmares. There was a place inside him that was on fire, and it had been burning for a very long time. And the heart scale had pulled her into the middle of it. Vera did not tell Thalric about the burning city. She did not tell Osric either. What would she say? That she had been dragged into the Dragon King's subconscious and watched fire drip from his fingers while a dead city smoldered around them, that the heart scale, the artifact that was supposedly keeping him alive, had burned its own shape into her palm, she told Brindis. The elder healer listened in silence, her weathered hand still sorting dried valerian root, her expression giving nothing away. When Vera finished, Brindis held out her hand. "Show me your palm." Vera extended her hand. The faint amber outline of the scale was still visible like a brand. Brindis studied it, turned Vera's hand over, studied the back. "Interesting," she murmured. That was all she said. Vera wanted to scream. Instead, she returned to the king's chambers that evening, and the evening after that, and the one after that. A rhythm formed, fragile and strange, and entirely unlike anything she had imagined her life would become. In the mornings, Vera woke before Thalric and slipped out of his chambers before the palace stirred. She walked the dim corridors alone, the heart scale warm in the pocket of her dress, and returned to the healer's station as though she had spent the night in her own bed like a normal person and not on a narrow cot 5 feet from a sleeping dragon. During the days, their lives did not overlap. He ruled the 5 realms from his study and his council chamber. She treated burns and set bones and brewed tinctures for visiting wolves who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The Ashenmere delegation had formally released her from their party, which was a polite way of saying Fenric had requested she be removed. The word stung more than she wanted to admit. Removed. Like a stain. Like a problem someone else would have to deal with. But in the evenings, when the palace quieted and the corridors emptied, she crossed through the iron-reinforced door into the Dragon King's private world, and the sting faded. Not because Thalric said anything kind. He barely spoke at all those first nights, answering her questions as monosyllables and grunts. His attention fixed on his reports and correspondence as though she were a piece of furniture that happened to facilitate sleep. But the small things accumulated. On the 3rd night, the cot was replaced with a proper bed. It was narrow still, built for one. But the mattress was thick, and the pillow was soft, and the blanket was real wool, instead of the threadbare thing she had been shivering under. "Thank you for the bed," she said as she arranged her things. Thalric did not look up from his reading. "What bed?" Vera bit back a smile. On the 5th night, the fire basin was already burning high when she arrived, the room warm and waiting, and a cup of herbal tea sat on the table beside her pillow. She wrapped her hands around it and felt something loosen in her chest. "I appreciate the tea, Your Grace," she said. "I did not order tea," Thalric replied, still reading. "Of course not." On the 7th night, she could not sleep. The silence was too heavy, the unfamiliar room too large, the events of the past week too enormous to process in the dark. So she did what she always did when the world felt too big. She talked. I told him about the Epian test healer at Ashenmere who had confused Tansy with chamomile and accidentally induced vomiting in the entire visiting council of the Greyhaven Pack during a feast. She told him about Brindis teaching her to stitch wounds by practicing on raw chicken thighs, and how she had accidentally stitched one to her own sleeve without noticing. She did not know when his breathing changed. She did not notice the moment the pen stopped scratching against parchment. But in the morning, as she gathered her things to leave, Thalric said without looking up from the fresh rip he was already reading, "The apprentice, the one who poisoned the Greyhaven Council. What happened to them?" Vera froze in the doorway. He had been listening, he remembered. 3 months of latrine duty, she said carefully. And a lifetime ban from the kitchens. "Was it you?" he asked. The question was so unexpected, she laughed before she could stop herself. "No, that one was genuinely not me." His gaze lifted to hers and something flickered there, not quite warmth, but something adjacent to it. Something that made her stomach do an entirely involuntary flip, though there was one incident with a poultice that turned the pack elder's beard. "Bright orange," she admitted. "That was me." The corner of his mouth lifted. Not a ghost this time, an actual, visible, unmistakable fraction of a smile. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds before he mastered it, but Vera saw it. And the sight landed in her chest like sunlight hitting water. She thought about that almost smile for the rest of the day. She thought about it while grinding herbs, and while bandaging a guardsman's hand, and while eating supper alone in the healer's station. She thought about it as she walked back to his chambers that evening, and found the fire already burning, and the tea already waiting, and the dragon King already at his desk, pretending he had not arranged any of it. A week passed, then two, and somewhere in the middle of the third week, Vera realized she had stopped thinking about Fenric entirely, not because the wound had healed, it had not, but because there was something else now, growing quietly in the space where the hurt had been, something she was not ready to name. Something that's pulsed in time with the heart scale in her pocket and grew a little warmer every evening she spent in that room, listening to the Dragon King breathe himself to sleep. Vera opened her eyes and knew immediately that something had shifted. The room was still dark. The fire basin burned low, and the heart scale glowed softly on the bedside table. But she was not in her bed. She was standing beside his. She did not remember getting up. She did not remember crossing the room, but here she was, close enough to see the faint amber veins of light that traced beneath his skin when he slept, close enough to feel the heat that radiated from him, warmer than any human body should be. The heart scale in her pocket pulsed hard, almost urgently, and her hand moved without her permission. Her fingers reached toward his face, hovered above the sharp line of his jaw, so close the warmth rising from his skin reached her fingertips. She snatched her hand back and stumbled away from the bed, her heart slamming against her ribs. What was she doing? Sleepwalking? Drawn by the scale? She pressed her back against the wall and tried to catch her breath. In the morning, she kept her distance. She dressed quickly behind the folding screen and gathered her things with efficient, clipped movements, avoiding his gaze. Thulric noticed. "Are you unwell?" he asked from the window. "Fine. Perfectly well. Just tired." She was speaking too quickly. She could hear it. And she could not stop it. "I should get to the healer's station. Busy day. Many ailments. Lots of sick people who need me." He studied her. And the weight of that golden stare made her skin prickle. "You are avoiding looking at me," he observed. "I am not avoiding anything. I am simply looking at other things. The door, for instance. Very nice door. Excellent ironwork." Something shifted in his expression. Vera. It was the first time he had used her name. Not Miss Vera, not the healer, not an impersonal you. Just her name, spoken low. The syllables rolling through his voice like smoke through still air. The sound of it went through her like a physical touch. Settling somewhere beneath her ribs and radiating outward, she made the mistake of meeting his eyes. The look on his face stole the breath from her lungs, not cold, not composed, not the carved granite mask he wore for everyone else. Something raw had surfaced, something startled and hungry, and immediately, visibly suppressed. His pupils were blown wide. The dark gold of his irises reduced to thin rings, and she watched him catch himself, watched the walls go back up, one by one. Like shutters closing against a storm, he turned away, his whole body taut, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You should go," he said, his voice rough. But he did not move away from the window, and as Vera gathered her things with fumbling hands, she saw it. His reflection in the glass. He was watching her, the hunger in that reflected gaze, unguarded because he thought she could not see it, made her nearly drop the heart scale. She fled. There was no other word for it. She walked down the corridor on legs that did not feel entirely her own, the heart scale burning against her thigh through the fabric of her dress. Her wolf, quiet and dormant her entire life, had begun to stir. It pressed against the walls of her chest, restless and wanting, oriented towards something behind her, something she was walking away from. She told herself it was the scale. It was the proximity. It was the bizarre, artificial arrangement that forced two strangers to share sleeping quarters. It was anything and everything except the one thing she was terrified it actually was. Because fated bonds were for people with bloodlines and status and futures, not for cast-offs. Not for women whose own alphas called them a pleasant distraction. Not for orphans who had been left at the Ashenmere gates with nothing but a name and a blanket so threadbare it fell apart the same winter. She was not the kind of person who got to have that. She could not be. And yet her wolf disagreed violently, and the heart scale pulsed against her leg in a rhythm that matched his breathing. And every step away from his chambers felt like walking through water that was growing thicker with every stride. By the time she reached the healer's station, her hands were shaking. Brindis took one look at her face and set down the mortar. How bad? The elder healer asked. Vera sank into the nearest chair and put her head in her hands. I think I am in very serious trouble, she whispered. Brindis studied her for a long moment. Your wolf, she said. It was not a question. It has never done this before. It has been silent my whole life. And now it will not stop. Because it has found what it has been waiting for, Brindis said simply. The heart scale did not create this, child. It merely revealed it. Vera looked up, fear bright in her eyes. Do not say it. A bond, Brindis said anyway. Because Brindis had never once in her life refrained from saying something because someone asked her not to. Incomplete. Unaccepted. Pulling at both of you whether you like it or not. Vera shook her head. He is a dragon. I am a wolf. That does not happen. And yet, Brindis replied, gesturing at Vera's trembling hands, at the heart scale glowing steadily in her pocket, at the flush that had not left her face since she walked in. Here you are. Vera said nothing. She sat in the healer's station with her cold tea and her racing pulse, and tried very hard not to think about the way his voice had sounded when he said her name. She failed completely. That evening, when Vera arrived at the king's chambers, the door was open. Thalric stood in the center of the room, fully dressed, his posture radiating the kind of controlled stillness that she had learned to recognize as barely contained turmoil. Osric stood beside us, expression unreadable. Your Grace, Vera said from the doorway, her heart already picking up speed. Something was wrong. She could feel it through the heart scale, a cold thread of dread winding through the usual warmth. Brindis tells me you have been entering the fire, Thalric said without preamble. Vera's stomach dropped. She shot a look at Osric, who gave a fractional shake of his head. Not him. Brindis had gone directly to the king. It happened once, Vera said carefully. Through the heart scale. I touched it during one of your nightmares, and I was pulled into a place. A burned city. Thalric flinched. The reaction was small, just a tightening around his eyes. But on a man who controlled every micro-expression with military precision, it was the equivalent of a shout. Once was enough, he said. You should not have seen that. No one should. Your Grace, I am fine. It did not hurt me. He looked at her hand. The one she had instinctively curled closed. Show me your palm, he said. Vera hesitated, then uncurled her fingers. The amber imprint of the heart scale was still visible, faded but unmistakable. Thalric stared at it, and something in his face collapsed. That is a burn mark, he said, his voice flat. My fire marked you. It is barely a scar. I have worse from spilling poultices. It will get worse. His voice had gone cold, not angry cold. The kind of cold that came from a man forcing himself to do something he did not want to do. The longer you stay near me, the deeper the fire will reach. Tonight was a warning. Next time, it will not let you go so easily. Vera's pulse hammered in her throat. You do not know that. I know what my fire does, Thalric said. And the rawness in those words cut through every defense she had. I know exactly what it does to the people who get too close. Take the heart scale back to the healer. Leave Solvere with the next departing delegation. Osric will arrange safe passage to any territory you choose. Vera's hand tightened around the scale in her pocket. You are sending me away. I am keeping you alive. The words landed like a blow to the chest. Not because they were cruel, but because they were kind. And the kindness made them so much worse. He was not rejecting her. He was sacrificing the only thing that let him sleep to protect a woman he barely knew. Or perhaps not barely. Perhaps the bond had already told him everything he needed to know. Perhaps that was precisely the problem. And what happens to you? She asked, her voice unsteady. Without the heart scale, without sleep. That is not your concern. Of course it is my concern. I am she stopped. The word that had nearly left her mouth was too enormous, too terrifying, too impossible to say in a room with Osric standing 3 feet away, and the Dragon King dismantling the only thing keeping him alive like it meant nothing. You are my healer, Thalric finished for her, his voice rough. And I am releasing you from the arrangement. That is final. Go, he said. Not looking at her, please. The please shattered her. She turned and walked out of his chambers, the heart scale clutched against her chest. Her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall until the door had closed behind her. In the empty corridor, she pressed her forehead against the cold stone and let herself break. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the full weight of what had happened. He had sent her away, just like everyone else, just like Fenric. Just like the parents who had left her at the gates with nothing. Everyone she had ever cared about had eventually decided she was not worth the trouble of keeping, and the worst part, the very worst part, was that Thalric had done it because he thought she was worth protecting, which meant she could not even be properly angry about it. 5 days passed. 5 nights without his chambers, without the fire basin, without the sounds of his breathing steadying into sleep beside her. 5 mornings of waking alone in the small room Osric had arranged for her in the healer's wing, the heart scale cold and dim on the table beside her pillow. It should have faded. Physical distance was supposed to weaken these things. That was how it had always worked with Fenric. The hurt from his betrayal had dulled within weeks, once she stopped seeing his face every day. But this was nothing like Fenric. This was cellular. This was her body turning against itself, rebelling against a separation it had not agreed to. The headaches started on the 2nd day. By the 3rd, light hurt. By the 4th, she worked with the curtains drawn, grinding herbs by touch because her vision kept swimming. Her wolf, which had been so restless and alive these past weeks, had gone terrifyingly silent, not calm. Silent the way a creature went silent when it was dying, and the heart scale now barely flickered. Its warmth had bled away, leaving it cool and heavy in her palm, more stone than living thing. Vera caught glimpses of Thalric occasionally across the courtyard. Tall and unmistakable, but the sight of him made the ache in her chest spike so violently she had to look away. He did not look at her. He moved through the palace like she had never existed. But Bryndis noticed. Bryndis noticed everything. "You look like you have been dragged behind a horse," the elder healer said on the 4th morning. "When did you last eat a full meal?" Vera tried to remember. She could not. "Bread, I think." Bryndis's mouth thinned. "The heart scale. Show it to me." Vera produced the scale. Bryndis held it up to the light and frowned deeply. The scale sat in her palm, dull and gray at the edges, its amber center barely visible. Like an ember slowly dying. "What does that mean?" Vera asked, though something in her gut already knew. Bryndis set the scale down with careful precision. "A dragon's heart scale is not a gift. It is a lifeline. When he removed it, he gave you the thing that was keeping him alive. Without it, his fire has no anchor. It will turn inward. It will consume him." Vera's blood went cold. "How long? I do not know. Weeks, perhaps less. He would know better than I would." "Which means he knew the cost when he gave it to you, and he knew the cost again when he sent you away." The room tilted. Vera gripped the edge of the workbench. "He is dying. He has been dying since the moment the scale left his chest," Bryndis confirmed. "And based on the state of you, so are you. The bond is incomplete, but it has gone far enough that his deterioration is pulling you down with him. So if he dies, you will follow, perhaps not immediately, but yes." Vera stared at her, the full horror of it settling into her bones. He had sent her away to save her, and in doing so, he had ensured they would both die. On the 5th day, the summit held a formal assembly. All delegations were required to attend. Vera had no choice. She dressed carefully, braided her hair, and walked to the great hall that felt made of glass. The hall was full. Every pack delegation, every noble, every counselor. She could see Fenric near the front with Dilara at his side, looking polished and utterly at ease. The sight of them did not sting. She was too numb for anything except putting one foot in front of the other. The Dragon King sat at the head of the hall on a raised dais. Even from across the room, she could see the damage. His cheekbones stood sharper than they had a week ago. The dark gold of his eyes had dimmed, and the stiff set of his shoulders looked less like composure and more like the only thing holding him upright. He was burning from the inside. The bond carried it to her, through the dying heart scale in her pocket, a low, constant heat that was eating him alive. Osric was speaking. Something about territorial boundaries and trade routes. Vera tried to focus. The words slipped through her mind like water through open fingers. She needed to sit down. The bench was 3 steps away. She could make it. She took 1 step, the floor tilted. The hall went bright at the edges, then gray, then white. She heard the heart scale hit the stone floor before she did. A sharp musical sound that rang through the assembly like a struck bell. The scale blazed. Not dim, not fading, blazing. The moment it left her hand and struck the ground, it with golden light so intense that every person in the hall turned to stare. And then Vera was falling. She heard her name, not from the crowd, from the dais, from a voice that cracked open the silence like a thunderclap. Raw and desperate and wrecked with a terror she had never heard from him before. Vera. She did not feel the impact. She felt arms. She felt heat. So much heat, wrapping around her as she was caught and pulled against a chest that burned like a furnace. She felt the hammering of a heartbeat beneath her ear, too fast, too frantic, and hands cradling her head with a gentleness that did not match the violence of the sound he had made when he said her name. He had crossed the entire hall. He had moved from the dais to the center of the room in the time it took her to fall. And he was holding her now against him in front of every delegation, every noble, every wolf and dragon in attendance. And he did not seem to care. "Move back," Thalric snarled at someone who stepped too close. The sound was barely human. It was the deep, resonant warning of a dragon protecting something it would burn the world to keep. Vera blinked. His face swam above her, sharp and pale and terrified. "Stay awake," he said, his voice shaking. "Vera, stay awake. You look terrible," she whispered. He made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "You are unconscious on a stone floor and you are critiquing my appearance." "You are not sleeping," she murmured. "I can see it on your face." "No," he admitted, his arms tightened around her. "Brindis." He roared over his shoulder. "Now." When Vera opened her eyes again, she was in the healer's station. Thalric sat beside her bed, his head in his hands, and Brindis stood at the foot of it with her arms crossed, and an expression that said she had been waiting for this exact moment with the grim satisfaction of someone whose worst predictions had come true. "The heart scale is tied to both of you now," Brindis said, addressing Thalric directly. "You gave it, she received it, and the bond that formed between you used the scale as its anchor. Separating you does not protect her, it kills you both." Thalric's hands dropped from his face. He looked hollowed out. "There must be another way." "There is not," Brindis replied flatly. "The bond must be completed or it will consume you. Both of you." The Dragon King looked at Vera. In his eyes she saw the full weight of what he was carrying. Not just the curse, not just the fire, not just the sleeplessness, but the unbearable knowledge that the person he was trying to protect was dying because of him. "Tell me what happened to you," Vera said quietly. "The fire, the city, all of it. Tell me the truth." Thalric closed his eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, the Dragon King looked truly defeated. Brindis closed the door and left them alone. The healer's station was quiet, lit only by the low flame of a single oil lamp. Thalric sat with his forearms on his knees, his head bowed, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere very far away. There was a settlement in the northern reaches, Thornfeld, a wolf territory. Small, isolated, mostly farmers and craftsmen. They had been there for generations, long before the Dragon Throne extended its borders that far. He paused, and Vera could see the effort it took to keep his voice level. A corruption took root there, a dark magic that spread through the land itself. The soil went black, the livestock died, the wolves who stayed too long began to change, becoming feral, violent, losing themselves. The corruption was spreading south toward the populated territories, and it was accelerating. Vera listened in silence, the heart scale resting on the blanket between them, dim and barely warm. My council advised containment. Every scholar, every mage we consulted said the same thing. Dragonfire was the only force strong enough to purge corruption of that magnitude. Burn the infected land and everything on it, and the spread would stop. His hands clenched. I sent envoys first, messengers to evacuate the settlement. Most of the people left, but some refused. The elders, the ones who had lived there all their lives. They would not abandon their home. They believed they could survive it, that the corruption would pass. He stopped speaking for a long moment. Vera did not push. I gave them 2 weeks, Thalric continued, then 3. The corruption was reaching the Ashvale border. Thousands of wolves lived in the path of its spread. Every day I waited, the radius grew. So I flew north. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. I burned Thornfeld to the ground, every acre, every structure, every tree. The fire raged for 3 days before the corruption was purged. I stayed above it the entire time, feeding the flames, making certain nothing survived. Vera could feel the weight of what was coming. It pressed against her through the bond like a physical force. On the second day, a girl ran out of the tree line. She was young, barely grown, and she was carrying something. A bundle of papers. She was running toward me, shouting, waving the papers above her head. His voice cracked. I could not hear her. The fire was too loud. I did not see her until it was too late. Vera's throat closed. She was a healer's apprentice. Thalric said, each word carved from stone. The papers she carried were research. Notes from the Thornfeld healers who had been studying the corruption for months. They had found something. A treatment. Not a cure, but a way to slow the spread, to buy time for a proper solution. He swallowed hard. A solution that did not require burning everything. The essence that followed was the heaviest thing Vera had ever felt. Her name was Avon, Thalric said. I learned it afterward. From the survivors who had evacuated. She had stayed behind to finish transcribing the research. She was running to deliver it when my fire took her. Vera reached for his hand. He flinched but did not pull away. An elder who survived the evacuation found me afterward. She was Avon's grandmother. She could barely stand, could barely speak, but she had enough left in her to curse me. His jaw worked. She said my fire would never rest. That it would burn inside me the way it burned inside Thornfeld. That every night I would return to the ashes and see what I had done. And you have. Vera whispered. Every night for 8 months, every night I stand in those ruins and watch it burn. And every night Avon runs out of the trees and I cannot stop it. He pulled his hand from hers and pressed both palms against his face. The curse should have weakened by now, that is what Brindis says. But it has not weakened, it has grown stronger. Because you feed it, Vera said. Understanding settling over her with terrible clarity. You believe you deserve it. Thalric said nothing. He did not need to. The answer was written in every rigid line of his body, in the hollowed shadows of his face. In the 8 months of sleepless nights he had endured without once telling anyone why. You had thousands of lives depending on your decision. Vera said, her voice fierce despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. The corruption was spreading. You evacuated everyone you could. You waited longer than your council wanted. And when a girl with a possible solution ran toward you through a wall of fire, you could not hear her over the flames. That is a tragedy. It is not a crime. She died because of me. She died because of a corruption that would have killed thousands more if you had not acted. Vera gripped his wrist, forcing him to look at her. You are not guilty of murder, Thalric. You are guilty of making an impossible choice and surviving it. Something broke behind his eyes. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a fracture, thin as a hairline running through the wall he had built to hold everything in. I hear her every night, he whispered. She is always running. She never stops running. Vera did not try to fix it. She could not fix it. She simply held his wrist, held his gaze, and let him sit with the truth of what he had just said aloud for the first time. Let me help you. She said, please, let me stay. Thalric stared at her, the firelight catching the devastation on his face. If I let you in and the fire takes you too, then we face it together, Vera said. That is what the bond is for. He searched her face for a long time. Slowly, his hand turned beneath hers and his fingers threaded through her own. He held on like she was the only solid thing left in the world. He did not say yes, but he did not let go. Brindis kept Vera in the healer's station overnight, insisting on monitoring her vitals, and until Vera prescribe herself a sedative just to escape the fussing. He told you about Thornfeld, Brindis said the next morning. It was not a question. You knew, Vera replied. I suspected. A guilt-fed curse anchored to Dragonfire. Growing stronger because the host believes the punishment is deserved. Brindis shook her head. It should have burned itself out within a few months. The only reason it persists is because he keeps feeding it. How do we break it? You already know how. Vera did know. The curse fed on his belief that he deserved it. The only thing that could counter it was something strong enough to reach him in the place where the fire lived and convince him to let it go. A completed bond, Brynda said. What you have now is a thread, half formed. You need the full thing. Accepted on both sides. Sealed. Vera's face burned. He will not accept it, she said. He will say the fire could hurt me. Then you will need to be more stubborn than his guilt, Brindis replied. Which, knowing you, should not be a problem. That evening, Vera did not wait for a summons. She walked through the palace corridors alone, the heart scale in her hand, its faint glow strengthening with every step closer to his chambers. The guards at his door exchanged a glance but did not stop her. She pushed open the door. Thalric stood by the fire basin, his back to her, his silhouette sharp against the amber light. He turned when he heard her enter, and the look on his face was a war between relief and dread. Vera, you should not be here. And yet here I am. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. I told you to leave Solvaire. You did. I am choosing not to. This is not a choice. This is a command from your king. You are not my king, Vera said. And the words came out steadier than she felt. You are my mate, whether either of us likes it, whether either of us is ready for it, whether it makes sense or follows any rule that has ever existed. The bond is real. The heart scale knows it. My wolf knows it. And you know it too. Thalric's composure cracked. She watched it happen in real time, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, the way his breathing went ragged. You do not understand what you are asking, he said, his voice low and strained. If the bond completes and the fire takes me, it takes you with me. You would be tied to a curse that may never break. And if I walk away... We both die anyway, Vera replied, stepping closer. Brindis confirmed it. The incomplete bond is killing us. Separation is not safety. It is just a slower death. He shook his head, backing away from her approach. I will not bind you to this. I will not make you carry what I carry. You are not making me do anything. I am choosing. Another step. He had run out of room. His back was against the window. And Vera stood before him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, close enough to see the amber veins of light flickering beneath the surface. I spent my entire life believing I was not worth choosing, she said, and her voice trembled but did not break. Fenric confirmed it. My parents confirmed it before him. I have been told in 100 different ways that I am not enough, that I do not belong, that I am a pleasant distraction at best and a burden at worst. She reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over the hollow where the heart scale had been. The skin was hot. Beneath it, she could feel his heart hammering. But your heart scale chose me. Your fire chose me, and I am choosing you back. So you can either accept that or you can try to send me away again. And I will walk right back through that door, and we can do this all night, because I promise you, Thalric, I am more stubborn than any curse. He stared down at her, his dark gold eyes glistening. I will ruin you, he whispered. I ruin everything. You have not ruined me yet. Vera replied. And I am standing right here. His control shattered. His hands came up to cradle her face, tilting her head back. And when he kissed her, it was desperate and searing, and full of every night he had spent alone in the dark trying not to want this. Vera kissed him back, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, the heart scale blazing between them. Hot and golden and alive in a way it had not been in days. She pressed the scale against his chest, right over the hollow where it had once lived, and whispered against his mouth, "Come home." The heart scale sank into his skin like a key turning in a lock. Golden light erupted from the point of contact, flooding the room, and the bond that had been pulling at them for weeks snapped fully into place. It was not gentle, it was a tidal wave, a connection so deep and so total that Vera gasped and felt Thalric stagger beneath the force of it. She felt him, not just his warmth, not just his presence, but him, his grief, his exhaustion, his fierce and terrified love for her, all of it pouring through the bond like light through a prism. Thalric made a sound that was half relief and half surrender. and pulled her against his chest so tightly she could feel the heart scale humming beneath his skin, where it had settled back into place, glowing through the fabric of his shirt like a second sunrise. "Stay," he whispered against her hair. "Please stay. I am not going anywhere." Vera replied. They held each other in the amber light, the bond humming warm and golden and complete between them. And for the first time since she had arrived at Solvere, Vera felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Then sleep came for them both, and the fire carried them down into the dark. Vera opened her eyes to the smell of ash. The sky above her was sick with fire, a churning canopy of smoke and sullened red light, choked with the same rolling haze she remembered. The ground beneath her bare feet was black and cracked, radiating heat. Thornfeld stretched before her, burning, always burning. The walls still standing, the embers still glowing, the silence still absolute. But this time was different. This time she was not alone. Thalric stood beside her, and she could feel him through the bond, every emotion as clear her own. The guilt hit her first. Staggering in its weight, a tidal wave of self-recrimination that had been building for 8 months and had never once been allowed to crest. Beneath the guilt was sorrow, deep and aching and bottomless. And beneath the sorrow, so buried she almost missed it, was a love for the people he had destroyed that made her eyes sting. He had not burned Thornfeld with indifference. He had burned it with full knowledge of what he was taking, and the cost of that knowledge was the place they were standing in now. "I am here," Vera said, taking his hand. "I am not leaving." The dead appeared at the edges of the ruined square, not all at once. They materialized from the smoke, one by one, translucent and still, watching with eyes that held no malice. Farmers, craftsmen, elders. Wolves in human form, their faces worn and tired and sad. And at the front, small and slight with gentle eyes, stood a young woman clutching a bundle of papers to her chest. She bore the mark of what had taken her, faint and translucent like the rest of her. But her expression was not angry. It was patient, waiting. "Avon," Thalric breathed, and the name came out broken. Vera felt his instinct to drop to his knees, to submit to the punishment, to agree with the curse that told him he deserved this. She had felt the same pull her entire life. The voice that said she had been abandoned because she was not enough. The voice that said every person who left her was right to leave. She knew that voice. She had believed it for 23 years, and she was done. "You carry them because you loved them," Vera said, gripping his hand tighter, "not because you wanted to hurt them. You carry this because you are the kind of man who could not burn a settlement without burning a part of himself along with it." The ghost of Avon stepped closer. The papers in her hands rustled in a wind that did not exist. Through the bond, Vera felt Thalric's grief surge, felt the desperate loop of it. "She was coming to tell me there was another way, and I didn't hear her." "You could not hear her," Vera corrected gently. "The fire was too loud. The choice was already made. And the choice was made to save thousands of lives that would have been consumed by the corruption. You did not fail her, Thalric. You failed to be perfect, and that is not the same thing." He was shaking. The tremor passed through their joined hands, through the bond, through every thread that connected them. "I know what it feels like to believe you are the reason people leave," Vera continued. And the words cost her more than she expected, because she was not just talking about him anymore. "I was left at the gates of Ashenmere as an infant. No name, no family, no explanation. And for 23 years I have carried the belief that whoever left me there did so because I was not worth staying for." She turned to face him fully, tears on her face, her hand pressed over the heart scale in his chest. "But that is not true. It was never true. I was a child. There was nothing I could have done to deserve being abandoned. And you were a king facing an impossible decision with incomplete information. There was nothing you could have done to know what Avon was carrying. The curse tells you otherwise because that is what curses do. They find the wound you already have and pour poison into it." Avon's ghost watched them, her expression shifting. Something softened in those translucent eyes. "You can put this down," Vera whispered to Thalric. "You are allowed to grieve without being consumed. You are allowed to remember them without living in the fire. For a long suspended moment, nothing happened. The ruins burned, the smoke rolled, the dead watched. Then Thalric spoke, not to Vera, to Avon. "I am sorry," he said, and his voice broke on the words. "I am sorry I did not hear you. I am sorry I could not stop it. I am sorry that every choice I had was a terrible one and that you paid the price for the one I made." The ghost of Avon looked at him, slowly. She lowered the papers to her side, and then she did something the curse had never allowed before. She nodded. The fire in the ruins began to dim. Not extinguish, not vanish, but dim, the furious orange fading to ember red, then to the soft warm glow of a hearth. The smoke thinned. The choking weight of it lifted, and, for the first time, Vera could breathe properly in this place. One by one, the dead turned away. They walked into the fading smoke, their forms dissolving, their faces peaceful in a way they had never been before. Avon was the last. She looked at Vera, then at Thalric, and the ghost smiled. It was small and sad and real, and then she was gone. Thalric fell. His knees hit the blackened ground, and 8 months of grief and guilt and sleepless agony broke open like a dam. Vera caught him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders as he shook, as the sounds that came from him were too raw to be called crying, and too human to be anything else. "I have you," she said against his hair, holding him as the fires of Thornfell dimmed to nothing around them. "I have you. And I am not going anywhere." The burned city faded, the smoke dissolved, and they were back in his chambers, in his bed, the heart scale glowing warm and steady in his chest, the bond humming between them like a song that had finally found its key. Thalric looked at her, tears still on his face, and smiled. Vera had seen his ghost smiles, his suppressed smiles, his almost smiles, but this was his real smile, unguarded and fragile and full of something that looked like the beginning of peace. She kissed his forehead and pulled him close, and they slept. The curse did not shatter in a single night. Healing never works that way, not for dragons, not for wolves, not for anyone. Thalric still dreamed of Thornfilson sometimes. He still awoke in the dark with his fire flickering beneath his skin, and his breathing ragged with echoes of smoke. But Vera was there every time she was there, and the fires, when they came, dimmed faster each time she held him. He learned to speak about it, not all at once, not in grand confessions, but in fragments offered over quiet mornings and long evenings. Vera listened to every piece and held none of it against him. In return, she told him about the gates of Ashenmere, about the threadbare blanket, about the years of making herself small and useful, because she believed that was the only way to justify taking up space in a world that had not asked for her. "You take up exactly the right amount of space," Thalric told her one night, his arms wrapped around her, his voice rough with sleep. "In fact, you could take up more. I would not object." Their bonding ceremony was held in the great hall of Solvere, the same hall where a heart scale had been offered to a crying nobody with herb stains on her sleeves. The whispers came, of course. A wolf mated to a dragon, a foundling beside a king. But the whispers faded, as whispers do, and what remained was solid. Months later, Vera woke slowly to warm morning light filtering through the curtains of their chambers. Thalric was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even, the heart scale glowing softly beneath his skin in a rhythm that matched her own pulse. No nightmares, no fire. Just peace, hard-won and precious and entirely theirs. She settled against his shoulder, closed her eyes, and let sleep take her back under.